By 2030, 1 in 4 of us will be over 65. Today, about 16% of Canadians are already north of 65. And currently, seniors use about half of the healthcare budget. So looking to the future, those numbers are not sustainable. We know the main reason for the disproportionate use of the healthcare system by seniors is because of frailty. So, can anything be done to change the impact frailty has on the healthcare system? First of all, it's important to state frailty is not a natural consequence of aging. Rather, it's the intersection of age-related decline with chronic diseases and conditions. Most importantly, it's associated with many poor outcomes like falls, cognitive impairment, hospitalization, admission to long-term care, and death. Sounds complicated, and it is, but what's encouraging is that we're learning more and more about how and when it happens and how to prevent it. Researchers in Canada are considered world leaders in frailty, and none is better known than Dr. Ken Rockwood from Dalhousie University. He is the inventor of multiple healthcare tools to diagnose frailty, which are used around the world. He's considered the leader on frailty and frailty prevention. We asked Dr. Rockwood to join us for a conversation that matters about changing what we know about frailty and how we treat it.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Dr. Ken Rockwood, welcome. You are the author of the Rockwood Clinical Frailty Scale. What is the geriatric assessment tool that you're named after and the Frailty Index that you've created?
So there's a couple of things. One is a Frailty Index and the other one is a geriatric assessment. So the Frailty Index is a way to understand how fit or frail someone is. So the version of it that we're using here is based on a geriatric assessment. So let's talk about a geriatric assessment first. So geriatric assessment, it has a terrible name because it sounds like you do an assessment, you walk away. They should actually call it geriatric evaluation and management tool with care plan, but they don't. They call it a geriatric assessment. And the idea is that if you're going to look after someone who has a bunch of things wrong with them, then you can't just go with the diagnosis. If people only have 1 or 2 things wrong, then those 1 or 2 diagnoses, they will fit pretty well what's wrong with the person. By the time you get 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 things wrong, any particular diagnosis only fits to a small extent. So you have to have a much better understanding of the person. And you have to have a better understanding of the person in ways which are useful to understanding their health. And that turns out to be a few basic things. So the diagnoses are important, but that's not where you start. You want to start with an understanding of, can they think? Do they feel happy? Are they able to walk? Are they able to function? Are they able to be polite enough to wait to go to the toilet to pee and poo? And do they engage with other people? And those things are the essence of understanding what their health is like. You need to know that because when those things start to go awry, there's likely a diagnosis lurking there. But if you were to start from the idea that someone who has many things wrong is just the same in every diagnosis as someone who only has that thing wrong, you'll be disappointed. And this is a big problem in healthcare right now because we have designed healthcare, we've made it 1,000 times better than it was even a generation ago in virtue of knowing more and more and more about how things work. And so just like if you're going to have surgery done, best to have it done in a place where they do thousands a year and not a few a week. The outcomes will be demonstrably better. Always best to deal with people who are specialists in the thing you have wrong. But again, it falls down, we get a bunch of things wrong. That metaphor of that illness will not work as well. And so a lot of things that happen to older people who have a bunch of things wrong with them happen as a consequence of not knowing how to focus on the whole person. And this whole person thing sounds like a bit of an airy-fairy, hippie concept, but it's actually well grounded in what happens with aging. So what happens with aging is first at the level of cells and then the level of molecules and subcellular processes, people accumulate damage. Most of the damage comes as a byproduct of living. If you breathe things in and out, if you eat, all of that will set up a small amount of damage in relation to the processes which are undertaken. Mostly our damage repair processes are really, really, really good. So put 5 more nines in % successful. But as time goes by, even that level of problems, of times when the repair didn't work exactly right, that starts to accumulate. Again, when people are young, their repair processes for even the damage which comes about, they work pretty well too. But as time goes by, those small things add up. It's the same idea as compound interest. The idea behind compound interest is less the doubling time that you'll double your paltry funds in between the age of 15 and 30 if you had a 15-year doubling time. That's not where you make the money on it. You make it towards the end when you're about to retire, and from sort of 50 to 65, that's a good doubling time, and 65 to 80, that's a good one too, and that allows people to retire even though they start with a small amount. It's exactly the same idea. The doubling time is fixed across the life course. But when you've got a lot of things wrong, you double that, then you get into trouble. So the notion of frailty refers to the fact that people have varying numbers of things wrong with them, either in virtue of having longer doubling times, a slower rate of accumulating problems, or having started with a lot of problems to start. So that heterogeneity and the things that people have wrong with them is really important because that's where risk comes from. So way back when the term frailty was invented, it was invented by demographers to capture a statistical concept, which is that even though everyone as they get older is more likely to die, that's not news. Not everyone of the same age has the same risk of death. And that unmeasured heterogeneity in the risk of death of people of the same age is what the term frailty means. And what we figured out over the years is that it's not just risk of death which increases with the number of things people have wrong with them, but the risk of all late life illnesses will increase. When people are young, say 50, children really, their risk of heart disease corresponds to a comparatively small number of things that we all know about. Lack of exercise and smoking and cholesterol, likely, and high blood pressure and diabetes and stuff like that. Those same risks are still a risk when someone's older, but they're dwarfed by all the other things people have wrong with them, which together tend to be more powerful risks than the traditional ones, because it's all about aging. So the challenge that we have from a healthcare standpoint is how do we deal with people who have many things wrong if the standard way that we've done things, which is to treat these things one at a time, if that not only doesn't work, it actually makes people worse off. So how do we come about with an understanding of the whole person? So the idea that we have is we should assess the things that's a proven technology, geriatric assessment. And the thing that we did was to try and make sure we understood where all the component parts are. And then we said, if you count those things up, the number of things that people have wrong with them will actually give you a pretty good indicator of how fit or frail they are.
So you have these 7 or 8 things here, here, and here. So not only are you looking at the individual elements, but then you look at what the dynamic interaction of these are on the individual.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head there. The complexity of frailty is what motivates and animates geriatrics. It's our burden and our glory. It's our burden because it's a lot more time consuming to deal with someone who's got a whole bunch of things wrong with them. It's harder to prescribe because you always have to imagine not just that there's a treatment effect, you have to anticipate that there will be side effects, because in complex systems you can't just do one thing at once. So it's more effortful. So what we tried to do with the frailty index is to provide a quantitative basis, a number that allows people to understand just how fit or frail an individual is, because that will help them anticipate the things that are likely to require attention. So you can imagine, we take the number of things someone has wrong, we have to divide that by the number of things that we counted. So the comprehensive geriatric assessment form, the one that we use, has about 70 items embedded in it. And we know that if someone has nothing wrong with them, their frailty index score will be 0, divided by 70 is equal to 0. and they don't need a geriatrician. They don't need a doctor at all. And if they get sick, they can go to the people who specialize in the one thing they're going to have wrong with them. But say now they've got 20 things wrong with them, or 30 things wrong with them, or 35 things wrong with them. So 35 divided by 70 is 0.5. So that is a very high frailty index score. And it turns out, for reasons which are fascinating, the highest frailty index score you could have, if we count 70 things, 99.9% of people will have no more than 49 of them wrong. There's a limit to frailty at a frailty index score of 0.7. So, because this gets at one of the ideas of why it's worth knowing what the number is. If someone comes in and says, we've created a frailty index and the average value is 0.5 and the range of it is 0.3 to 0.9, I say, no, you've done something wrong. Almost certainly you've misspecified the missing data, because there's no way to have people survive at scores that high. That won't happen. So the behavior of it is it's so characteristic that we can tell really at a glance of what the data distribution is, what the population is like, and whether the frailty index was scored appropriately or not. And it has a very characteristic internal structure and so on. So a big project we've got on right now is called the physics of frailty. We work with physicists and mathematicians to find out what is it about aging that gives rise to such regular behavior of the frailty index. So like, this is mind-blowing to me, right? I'm a simple country doctor. I didn't expect when we started all this off that it would turn into this thing, but it has, and so we're just trying to really get to grips with it.
So as a physician having the measurement, how do I then learn to use this information in a way that is going to benefit my patient? Because if I fix one thing, then it might knock something else out of balance. So how do I take this index and say, here's what needs to be addressed, and here's how I respond?
So the major challenge in geriatrics is how to deal with the complexity of frail older patients. And the complexity is irreducible. You can't fix it. You have to cope with it. You have to understand it. You have to get to grips with it. You have to learn to be happy with it. And the way you do that is like any complex state. It's pattern recognition. So, think of a really good mechanic, and you come in and you got this thing, you're not sure what's wrong, and 2 or 3 guys looked at it and they're not sure either. And you come in and say, it has this ping, and he says, when you go backwards, is it even louder? And you say, yeah, because he recognized what the pattern is. So what we've done is, through this and through the form that we use, we allow people to recognize the pattern of when something is working well and when it's not. And so even though as humans we're infinitely complex, we fail in fairly characteristic ways. So as humans, for example, when we're really, really ill, there's a few things which predictably will go wrong. They'll go wrong in varying orders depending on various circumstances. But let's take a really straightforward one. When someone's well, they walk around a lot. They go where they want to do. As they get sick, they move around less. When they're really ill, they're taken to bed, and they might not get out. And when they're about to die, they hardly move at all. So it turns out there's a natural ordering to that, and it turns out that you can quantify that too. So one of the things that people can do when they know what to look for is they have a pretty good understanding of an individual's overall rate of health, and they'll have a state of health. They can have a pretty good understanding of what the prognosis is, and they have a pretty good understanding of whether things are working or not. And these turn to be incredibly useful tools to address a lot of the dilemmas that we have in healthcare right now for older adults. So one of the dilemmas that we have is the terrible question of how far do I go with this patient? And if I start treatment, does that commit me? If I do anything at all, does that commit me to, in 3 days we're in the intensive care unit? How do I know when it's time to push, when it's time to back off? And it turns out that through a lot of the analytical techniques and the tools, we can translate it into numbers, which allow the basis for it to be better understood, but you can also teach these as observable phenomena. So for example, on the question of what happens with Dad, he's 83 years old. When we saw him a couple of weeks ago, he was starting to need some help to get around. He's pretty happy though. He's able to get out in the garden. Of course, he has to take his walker now, and he doesn't like that much. And look at him now. He's lying in bed, and it's really hard for him, even when the doctor came in and asked him to sit up so he could listen to his chest, he couldn't do it. The most he could do is he could reach his arm across his chest to the bed rail, but he couldn't pull. So we can look at that and say, okay, let's start treatment. He's got pneumonia. He said he's not ready to go, but he's only hooked up to machines. What are we going to do? So you can say, let's start treatment, but I promise you this, if in 2 days, Dad can reach over, grab the bed rail and start to pull himself up, he's doing okay. If we come back tomorrow and he can't get his arm across his chest, it's highly likely that he'll die. So let's start treatment, but let's not commit ourselves to a long course. Let's wait and see. But let's not see in some secret way where I'm the doctor and I come in and I've got numbers I might tell you and I might not. Let's bring everyone in. Let's bring your sister who's not really sure yet about letting Dad go, quote unquote, and explain to her what to look for. So the patterns are really clear, and it is very empowering to know what to do in the face of important life-threatening illness. It's very empowering for families to know what to expect and what to look for. And it really helps with a lot of these transitions. So that's why what I'm keen to do in promoting the understanding of how frailty works and how we are complex systems and how complex systems fail in characteristic ways, it's really meant to make it as simple as we can so that people can understand what the patterns are and where they come from.
Out of that, how do you get 90 different points of information that populate the index that provides an accurate indication of assessment of where the patient is on the scale?
So where the points come from, a bunch of them in a 70-point scale, but 25 of them will come from what are recognized as diseases or comorbidities. And very few people will have all 25. Most people will stop somewhere short of 15, but many frail patients will have between 5 and 15 diagnoses, which have to be taken into account for their health. And we'll give another bunch of points, typically about 11 or 12, to medications. And for there, we count the first 5 are free, use nothing against you for that. Sadly, in none of the work we've done have we found a way to score the medications as a benefit. Because what happens when you get up past 5 is the chances of a medication problem goes up too. So we know that the increase in the chance of a drug-drug interaction that's clinically important increases exponentially with the number of drugs that you take, and the turning point in the curve is somewhere between 6 and 7 drugs or so. So what we do is count things wrong. So if you're on 10 drugs, we'll count that as 3 points wrong. And then the rest of the things that we look at is the individual's cognition, and then their affect, their mood, and whether there are other issues with them, delusions and things like that. We look at the level of motivation they've got. We look at their health attitude, how do they feel about their health? And then we go through a list of these high order functions like mobility and balance, and how can they walk outside, do they need an aid, what they do in terms of daily life, the so-called instrumental activities, things you need an instrument to do, cook and laundry and clean and that sort of stuff. Then the personal or the basic ADLs. And by the time you add all of that up, pretty easy to get to 70.
70 points.
Yeah.
So let's say I've already entered that phase where I'm frail. How is this going to help the physician to help me so that I don't move further down the index?
Sure. So I think there will be some patients who will be helped just by knowing. And there are people who find it quite a relief to go talk to the doctor and start to be asked about things that may be important to them, but they haven't been keen to bring up, or they feel like someone's actually paid attention to their health. So questions like, how would you rate your health? And what do you look forward to? And are you generally happy? And are there times that you find that you're really sad for no good reason? Those things are actually empowering to do. Tell me about how far you can get around outside and what you like about that. There's a lot of things where people actually find it satisfying to talk about themselves. We call those people men, but still, done correctly, it can be actually very empowering. For the doctor, what helps is to understand what the patterns are. And because humans fail in predictable ways, it gets to be pretty easy to start to understand the degree of frailty that an individual has because of the patterns, right? So say in this frailty index score, if someone has a frailty index of 0.4, 100% they're going to have some impairment in their function. You can't get a frailty index that high without having functional impairment. So if someone has a lot of functional impairment with a lower frailty index, something's not right there. There's a ton of patterns which are there. So for example, if the assessment is done and you're relying on an informant saying, well, Dad doesn't drive anymore, he's had to stop that, and he doesn't do the banking anymore. Hey, but he's independent for shopping. You say, okay, just how are we doing that? Like, is it a corner store he's walking to? Just what goes on there? And how does he handle the money when he gets there? Is that what we meant by the finances? Or if you found that the person was truly impaired in these things, and you see they're supervising their own meds, you say, it's a lot easier to make change at the store than it is to figure out your pills half the time. So should we really be letting Dad do that sort of thing? Should we be asking about whether there's difficulty with regards to that? Should these things be, should they just be taken, or should we maybe examine whether there's a better way to achieve the good outcome that is meant by prescribing pills to someone? Can we simplify them? Do they need to be on as many pills as they're on? So what the Frailty Index does is give you a score that is a framework. The geriatric assessment allows you to understand the patterns by which you got there. So without this, it's a confusing mass of information. You're not sure how to order it. And people will default, this has been studied, people will default to things they're most familiar with.
Who do we turn to say, we need you to get involved? Is it the physician, or is it the community, as in healthcare providers and community resources?
The number, I think, is a good starting point to go from. People respond better if you can quantify it. And so if you could say most people at your age have a Frailty Index score of 0.15 and yours is 0.32, and by the way, I'm noticing that you're smoking and X and Y and Z, and here's some things which are likely contributing to why you have a bigger Frailty Index than we'd expect, a higher score than we'd expect for someone of your age. This is what you want to work on. After that, it becomes it's down to the individual doctor how to frame that in a way that patients will find useful.
Frailty, Dr. Rockwood, is clearly a collective issue. Thank you for doing this.